And good evening and welcome to the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association of Australia Facebook Live broadcast for Tuesday, the 8th of September. Where is the year disappearing? It's going so quickly. I'm Benjamin Morgan, Chief Executive, and this evening we are joined by Jack Vevers, who is the President of the Peninsula Aero Club down in Victoria. And Jack, you have found yourself in the spotlight and all throughout aviation media for the past year and a bit, as you've been engaged in defending the TIAB aviation community and airport against a fairly unruly and out-of-control council. But in recent days, the club has scored a major win in the Victorian VCAT, and we've invited you along this evening to give not only our members but industry supporters a bit of an update on what's been happening down at TIAB and where you will now be moving to after this verdict.
Right, yeah, thanks, Ben. It's been somewhat unwelcome. I didn't really want to end up in the spotlight of all the media around this, but we found ourselves in a situation that we had to fight back. We had the council come into us just a bit over a year ago, June of 2019, with a number of directives to shut the place down. And as a consequence, it caused what was a planning issue into a major social issue across the airport, whereas we have about 100 people employed, and we simply had to start sending people home until we got some legal advice and realised that the directives that we were given weren't sufficient to close us down, and that we discovered that we had all the rights in place that we needed. So we've mounted a campaign to fight back. And that's what we've been doing for the past 14 or so months, 15 months.
And Jack, obviously, the TIAB airport is not a new airport. It's not like this airport was only built a few years ago. This airport's been around for some time. And so this is a problem that really blindsided the club. It kind of came from left field. And I think they were dredging up some old issues to do with the fact that there was a church or something many years ago that hasn't traded, and some real underhanded behaviour seems to have taken place and been used to try and front what really became quite clear as an effort to shut down the airfield.
Yeah, that certainly became one of the issues that we had to fight back. It was absolutely ludicrous that we've been there for 55 years, more than half a century now, and there was a church not far from the airport, which basically stopped Sunday services in 1978. And the members, our members, were actually members of that church back in '65 when we started, and did a lot of work and helped getting that church into the an operating church in town. And when it closed down in '78, we continued to not observe a church hour or holy hour between 9:30 and 10:30 on a Sunday morning. And so the council came in and wanted to try and reapply this condition that we had in our permit. And we hadn't observed this for more than 40 years. Under the nose of the council, in full recognition that we were doing it and supportive of it. And then we found ourselves having to go off to VCAT to fight it. But on the lead up to that, the council approached us and asked us to make an application to remove the church hour from our permit. And that set in train almost a catastrophe, in as much that they thought that they could then apply new conditions, even though they promised they wouldn't do that to us. And one of the conditions that they wanted to put in place was a master plan. Now, that's not part of the planning scheme, and they had no lawful right to do that. But it required us to enter into what they call a 173 agreement, which gave us an obligation to observe certain things, an agreement around providing this master plan that could be opened up anytime within 3 to 5 years for them to throw in new conditions. So it sort of became a portable permit, and would have severely damaged the club. So we took them to court, or took them into VCAT over that on another matter where they tried exactly the same thing, and we won that. And VCAT called it unlawful and forced them to remove it from our permit. So we've moved on since then, and then we've gone back and we've fought the issue around the church hour, which we received a decision last week that we've won that too. So it's just been a series of hurdles, but the council have significant power, and thankfully we've had the resources and the capacity to fight this, because I don't know how a small club would survive it, to be honest.
And you raise a really interesting point there, and I've seen this, Jack, in my own dealings with local councils across Australia, where we see an effort to push airports out or restrict airports or close airports, is that they truly do wield power, and to fight them and to succeed is no easy feat. And so it has been quite an achievement for the Peninsula Aero Club to be able to respond in the manner that you have, and to win the day.
Yes, we have been lucky, but I see it in other places too, and I get a lot of phone calls from small airports facing the same situation that we've been going through. That the councils are very poor in the planning process, that they allow encroachment towards the airports with building, and they don't recognise the impact on amenities or people's amenities by doing that. And whilst there may be things in their own 173 agreements, this is the home purchasers building in the area, and of course we object, and the best we've been able to achieve is to have 5 and 6 star ratings applied against these homes to try and reduce or improve the noise attenuation. It's still inadequate. All we know is when people start getting into that position, you turn them into great complainants later on. And the council just haven't recognised this, and they haven't observed their own obligations around managing planning issues around airports.
Well, look, we interviewed New South Wales MP Adam Crouch, who's a member for Terrigal, a couple of weeks ago, and he raised himself concerns with respect to state planning laws and obviously Commonwealth laws that allow these airports to basically have residential and light and large-scale commercial activities built right up to the boundaries. Because you're absolutely correct. What that does is that just simply installs a future noise complainant base, and that becomes a very powerful lobby with time. We've seen that at Evans Head. We've seen it around Moorabbin Airport. We've seen it around Bankstown Airport and others. And ultimately, it ends up restricting aviation, which then further puts pressure on the aviation economy, which at this stage is under a pretty significant pressure already.
Yes, indeed. And the councils themselves are very poor at managing the complaints. They're not resourced to do it. They don't understand aviation. They don't understand, the laws that we're trying to operate in terms of, requirements around the navigation regulations, air navigation regulations. And to give you an example, I've had people from the council say, well, why have you got to do a run-up? And you explain to them about the requirement to do that for aircraft. Well, can't you do that inside the hangar? Well, no, we can't do a run-up inside a hangar.
That might be a little unsafe.
Yeah, or can you land, in our instance, to the north and take off to the south? Well, no, we really need to land and take off into wind. Things like this. So they just don't understand the complexities behind aviation and how to manage it, and they just don't know how to work with the community around complaints. We made a step forward a couple of years ago by engaging Air Services Australia to help in terms of managing complaints, and they've been great. They can actually filter, whether it's a CASA issue or an EPA issue or a local issue, and they also understand the air regulations, and they can talk to the community as a third party, and they have an auditing process in place, and they have an ombudsman that can deal with it later if they're not happy. But councils getting involved is just a disaster.
Well, look, one of the big things that we saw from, I guess, the overall action at TIAB, and I think it's really worth noting, Jack, was the outpouring of community support. And it was absolutely phenomenal, the job that the club did in not only engaging with the aviation industry, but the efforts to engage with the local community as well, so that the local community understood clearly what was at risk if the airport closed and what would be the loss to the broader community. And so, my hat really goes off to the club in respect of this, because quite often this is really the most difficult thing to achieve, and that is a broader understanding from the local community of just how valuable that airport is, not just for today, but moving into the future.
Yes. Like I got to say, I was really humbled by the amount of support that came out of the community. In reality, like most airport complainants, it's usually just a handful of people that complain. But the greater majority in town around the airport were just very much in support of what we do. If you look at it from a triple bottom line, sort of the economic and the social and the environmental issues, from the amount of employment that we bring into town. We have 100 people that work across the precinct. Everybody knows who they are, and that's why it became a social issue as opposed to a planning issue. The council misunderstood that. But, the tourism, the freight, the training that we do, we've been an incubator for many years for people starting their careers. From a social point of view, all the charity work we do, we're very much embedded with the community. We raise substantial amount of money. I think about $150,000, $160,000 over the last 3 air shows. We've donated directly back into the community. The angel flights. We support the police. From the environmental point of view, the firefighting, the air ambulance, all of these things that we do, we become, valued citizens and a force for good in the community. And so they backed up and supported us and started petitions and put up signs in their front yards and printed T-shirts and did all sorts of things. It wasn't us. This was the community.
Well, Jack, it is the key. The key is to gain that support of the local community so that the community becomes part of the voice that protects airports. And I know there's comments coming in now from people I know down in Victoria saying, how do we protect Tooradin? How do we protect Druin, Leongatha, Moorabbin and Essendon and other airports? And I think that this is part of that essential strategy, is that the aviation industry has got to become much better at engaging with the broader community so that we bring them into our world, and we also come into their world a little bit, so that there's a broader understanding of that value. Because when that happens, you see what takes place, or what took place at TIAB, which was just a huge response. I think you and I were discussing there last week that there were 20-something thousand signatures of support for TIAB. And if you look at the aviation industry, there's only something like 36,000 pilots in total in Australia. And so to have 20-odd thousand signatures of support in your local area speaks volumes of the fact that the local the local community really get it and understand it.
Yeah, that's right. We had 25,000 signatures on a petition. And we also put in a parliamentary petition, which attracted, a huge amount of support. In fact, it was the third largest official parliamentary petition ever tabled in Parliament in Victoria. And what's more, is that was done within 10 days. It was only open for 10 days. Some of these other ones have been open for 6 months. I mean, it spoke volumes about the amount of support that we had to stop this. But in spite of all that, the council still charged on.
And so what have you had feedback from the council since the VCAT result? And where do you feel that relationship is now going to move forward to?
Well, yeah, good question. No, I haven't heard from them. I certainly see their press releases and the things that they put out there on social media. Look, I think at the moment we are in confrontation mode, sadly. I have extended the olive branch many times to them to try and get them to the negotiating table. Look, we all want to have faith in our regulators. We don't want to argue with them. We don't want to fight with them. We want to work with them. And that was my starting point. And I just want them to, stop trying to be, Mr. Planning, but try and be the responsible authority, and try and be the proper authority in our area to work with us. At the moment, they haven't been able to do that. They just keep on trying to challenge us. But at the end of the day, we're going to have to work with them at some stage. But I think they're getting to the point where they're going to have to acquiesce and realise that, you know, we have the law on our side, we have all the facts on our side, and we also have the resources to fight it. And we'd all be much better off if they could just sit down and talk with us.
Well, imagine with the money that has been thrown away, preparing the legal cases, funding lawyers and seeking opinions. I mean, that's money that could have been incredibly invested into scholarships and other incentives to get young people involved in aviation from the local community. So it is a loss to the local community that that aero clubs and airport communities are forced to that outcome. And hopefully, Jack, what we'll see moving forward now is a little less of that confrontation. But, you know, from AOPA Australia's perspective, we think you've done an outstanding job in taking the interests of the aviation community forward. And as I've said to you, our hat really goes off to the fact that you've stuck to your guns on this and you've defended the entire aviation industry at that location. You haven't just defended TIAB and your local flyers, but it's been a demonstration of the fact that the national industry wants to see airports protected. We can't lose them.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm very mindful about the implications of us winning or losing on the industry, and that's not unnoticed, and we feel that responsibility, and you know, we're trying to do the best we can for aviation as well for ourselves. So, you know, we're doing everything we possibly can, and we enjoy and appreciate the support the fraternity is giving us.
Well, Jack, one of the incentives, or not incentives, the initiatives that AOPA Australia is working on right now is we're working with the New South Wales government, with Minister Crouch and Stokes, and soon we'll be meeting with Deputy Premier Barilaro to have a conversation on how the aviation industry can help the state of New South Wales post-COVID. We firmly believe that airports and the aviation industry can help play a key role in helping reinvigorate the state's economies. And we would love to be able to do the same down in Victoria. And I know we will be reaching out to have that conversation with the Victorian government when they finally get free of the current problems that they're dealing with. And we could talk for hours on what's happening in Victoria at the moment, but we will be doing so. And I would very much be interested in seeing to it that the Aero Club can help play a role with that. So there will be an invitation there for the club to try and work through that framework. And hopefully we can replicate what we're trying to do in New South Wales and put together a state strategy to enhance, secure, enhance, and take advantage of what the aviation industry can offer the state post-COVID-19. So thank you very much for coming along. Really appreciate you giving us a quick update and making time this evening. And fingers crossed that relationship with council really now starts to turn around for you.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me on.
That's no problems at all.
All right.
Okay, so everyone's been waiting for our next guest. I would like to just quickly join him in right now. Glenn, g'day. How are you?
Good, Ben. Good, matey.
You've just been sitting there listening to obviously our discussion with Peninsula Aero Club and that very important battle that they've been waging down there, not only on behalf of the TIAB community, but the aviation industry. And I think there's some parallels there in terms of what happens when authorities and regulators have power that goes unchecked. And most certainly it almost always invariably ends up in an extremely bad outcome for industry. Now, Glenn, obviously I welcome you back. This is the second time that you've joined us, and it's only been a very short break. But I have to say that there was an absolute outpouring of support and comments regarding your last appearance. And I think it is fair to say that many of the people across the aviation industry really felt your story. They felt what you were going through, and so many of the comments that I received were people angry, absolutely angry that something like this could happen in the aviation industry. So we've asked you to come back and to try and provide a little bit more detail around some of these issues to try and help, I guess, educate the industry as to what's been happening and to clarify some of the points. But in the time that I went back to you and said, look, there's been this support, we'd like you to come back, there's also been a really important development in that the Commonwealth Ombudsman has recently completed phase 1 of 2 phases of investigations into CASA's handling of this issue. And their first phase findings have been quite telling. Maybe if we could start with a bit of an overview of where that investigation has concluded, where the second phase investigation is heading, and then we might get into a little bit more of the questions in detail.
Yeah, certainly. All right. Cheers, Ben. Okay, thanks for having me back again, and thanks everybody, for the support. I mean, I did cover that last time, but the support for P. Prue and Auntie Prue, the people. I can see the messages that pop up across. There's one from Sean Polensky, old student. Cheers, mate. The support that I've got from industry and people has church here. Shouldn't say surnames. I won't get distracted by those, but look, it means a heck of a lot to me. There has been some developments, Ben. Look, there's the Commonwealth Ombudsman is doing an investigation. He said there's 2 stages to the investigation. The first stage of the investigation was the legal basis for CASA making the decision to close down my business. And the second stage of it was, as you're probably aware, CASA sent an email, which I have here, which was sent to my employer, that my continuing employment was untenable based on comments that I was making publicly. So CASA sent a direction to my employer to terminate my employment, which happened. The Commonwealth Ombudsman investigation in stage 2 is going to investigate the direction to terminate my employment, and also investigate the restrictions on my business that CASA placed to trade, and that was basically putting very limited dates of operation. So CASA gave me, for example, 7 days notice to operate a flying school. Well, you can't enrol students if you've only got 7 days operation. Your staff lose confidence, your suppliers lose confidence. So basically the CASA attack, if you like, was first off on what was called the aviation ruling, the document that they used to try and shut me down. The Ombudsman's determined that that was unlawful. And now in stage 2 of the investigation, he's investigating the restrictions on the business's ability to trade and the direction by CASA to terminate.
Well, Glenn, that's a pretty telling determination in phase 1 that, and I've read it, and I have, look, I'll say up front, I'm not an aviation lawyer. I'm just like everybody else in the aviation industry. We try to interpret the regulations as best we can. And in the case of the findings from the Ombudsman, I mean, they've been pretty clear. They're saying that there was no regulation that prohibited AOC, a franchised AOC.
Correct. And also importantly, Ben, that I could have been liable to, or damage was impacted on me as a result of that deficiency. I mean, if I've got it in front of me here on my phone, if you'd like me to spend a minute and read out the findings.
It might be good just in the interests of our viewers, and again, Glenn, understanding that, and again, I think it's important that there are senators from the Senate RRAT, there are members of Parliament, both state parliaments and federal parliament, that are watching these broadcasts. We, additionally to this, we are actually submitting all of these videos to the Senate RRAT inquiry into general aviation, because we feel it is very important that the voices of the general aviation industry are heard by the government in these inquiries. So I think it would be important just to quickly read through what that determination was.
Okay, so his initial determination in part was, as of October 2016, no Australian legislation prohibited franchising of an AOC, subject only to the exclusivity of the AOC holder's operational control, and that remained the case as of the 25th of March 2020. There would be no legal or regulatory impediment to Mr Buckley or APTA selling or licensing intellectual property in the form of its AOC exposition to other flight training organisations. And there would be no legal or regulatory impediment to CASA issuing Part 142 permissions on submission of those expositions. It says the ruling was not, this is the aviation ruling, the document that CASA used, the ruling was not amended to reflect the legislative change from 1st of December 2014, meaning that the civil aviation regulations and the ruling were no longer aligned in material ways. Conceptually, I accept CASA's view that the ruling may reflect broader considerations. Nevertheless, it is my concluded view that there was an administrative deficiency due to an absence of a direct relationship between the activity being regulated and the policy said to regulate it. This gave rise to ambiguity and uncertainty, with the potential to cause detriment to those relying on the accuracy of the regime, or conversely, prevent detriment from occurring. The Office of the Commonwealth Ombudsman is now proceeding with phase 2.
Well, that's certainly written by an ombudsman, but for the average layman within the industry, the average aircraft owner and pilot and aviation business operator, it effectively means that there were no regulations that prohibited you from operating a franchised AOC, and therefore we assume that the actions of CASA to tie up your business as a consequence of them interpreting that there weren't, or that their justification was that there was regulations to say that it couldn't be done, was incorrect.
Correct. Correct. They very clearly wrote to me and said it is not permitted, and I'll publish that. I'll put that email up on P. Prue and through on Auntie Prue, but they actually sent me an email saying it was not permitted. The Ombudsman found it was permitted. And I remind you, I went to I actually submitted this prior to the Commonwealth Ombudsman. I submitted this to the CASA Industry Complaints Commissioner, and he decided not to investigate it. Got brushed off by CASA's Industry Complaints Commissioner, yet the Ombudsman found out that it was unlawful.
Look, Glenn, an absolutely crazy situation. Let's now spend some time delving into things. I want to also communicate to you that I had the chairman of the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, Tony Matthews, who contacted me in this past 8 days, and I feel I'm comfortable in saying that Tony was pretty clear that he was not overly happy that AOPA was conducting these interviews, and his comment to me was that AOPA is just busy bringing on people who give half-truths and half-stories. And this really leads to my question, and that is, why did you decide to go public in the manner that you did with this? And I understand why we brought you onto the AOPA program to talk about it, because we really genuinely believe that you need to get your story across, because we think that the broader industry needs to understand what is going on with the safety regulator and the way that they are behaving and wielding their power, because there are very dire consequences with how that power is applied. But why have you done it? Why have you chosen to publish via PP Prune and to speak publicly about this issue?
All right, there's a number of reasons, Ben. I'm going to refer to my notes just to make sure I don't miss it. The first one, one of them is that it's a submission via Senator Susan McDonald as part of my submission to the Senate inquiry into CASA at the moment. So I would like this to form a part of that, and I'm hoping that this leads for the opportunity to present myself in front of that review committee up in Canberra at the appropriate time. But also, it's a safety consideration, Ben. You know, primarily, look, absolutely, I've lost a lot over this, Ben. I've lost everything over this. But primarily, it's also a safety consideration. If we've got a regulator that has a culture of bullying, has a culture of intimidating, and has a culture of not following its own procedures, a protocol, history of making unlawful decisions, impacting on business, growth of jobs. I mean, that culture is an unsafe culture. You know, covering up, not speaking the truth, not coming forward with information. CASA talk about half-truths. Well, I put that challenge straight back at CASA. So if as I claim that dangerous culture exists within CASA, it is actually a safety argument. Now, I know that culture exists within CASA, and then very shortly under Freedom of Information, Ben, I've requested some documents. Once those come through, I do intend to publish, but I'm convinced that bullying and intimidating culture that we experience outside of industry also exists within CASA, and I know that, Ben. Trust me. But I've been contacted.
Glenn, it almost reeks of what the police force were going through in New South Wales during the late 1970s, when corruption and the like was just reigning supreme, and the police force was quite literally internally, in internal turmoil because there was such a toxic environment. I mean, do you see similarities between that?
Oh, absolutely. But it is, I think, one of the other reasons I came out publicly is that, there's a lot, and I touched on this last time, there's a lot of good people in CASA, my allegations, and look, and I put my name to the, I want to come back to sort of absolve AOPA from some of the responsibility. So I'm accepting responsibility for it, but I'm naming the people, Ben. It's the names that keep coming up again and again. It's Dr. Jonathan Alec. It's Mr. Craig Martin. Now, these names come up again and again. Now, if you can just bear with me, and I've posted this on P-Pro, but the ABC did an investigative piece on the 7:30 report. You may recall it. It was an investigation into a gentleman by the name of Bruce Rhodes. Now, I don't know all the details of that accident. Okay, and I looked at that accident, that aircraft accident, unfortunately resulted in fatality, and it was very, very distressing. But what I can address, Bruce Rhodes went to his grave trying to protect his reputation, Ben. Okay, the ABC came to the party and they did that program. Now, I spoke to Bruce Rhodes before he passed away. His allegations were procedural unfairness, lack of natural justice, breaches of administrative law. So his argument was that CASA re-engineered the process, and he very clearly named Dr. Jonathan Alec, the Executive Manager of Legal, International and Regulatory Affairs, and Mr. Craig Martin. And he made videos about it that are public knowledge. They've been released, and I will release those on PPRU because they are already out there. So my point is that there's certain people within CASA, a very limited amount of people in CASA that bring so much damage. And that sentiment's expressed by many within CASA, I can assure you, about those same individuals. It's dangerous.
In the interest of transparency, Glenn, AOPA Australia did formally invite the chairman of CASA, Tony Matthews, to appear on this program and to provide some perspectives from, I guess, his view as to CASA's function and behaviour, along with the current state of the aviation industry. But we did receive a confirmation today that that request has been denied and that he does not intend on answering any questions by AOPA publicly on any of these matters.
Well, and on that, I've also extended invitations to Mr. Carmody, the CEO, to the CASA board, because now their response to me was they don't want to come in here because of the ongoing Commonwealth Ombudsman's investigation. Well, my response to that would be, come on here. I will be polite. I will be respectful. By coming on here and having a debate about it, it would actually assist the Commonwealth Ombudsman's investigation. So it's ludicrous to me that they won't appeal. But as I've alluded to before, I believe there's a cover-up within CASA and they're protecting those two individuals.
Well, when the Commonwealth Ombudsman released their findings on that Phase 1 investigation, the thing that struck my mind with it, Glenn, is that I immediately started thinking about everything that I've seen for the past 4.5 years in the aviation industry, in which I have watched CASA go after businesses on technical breaches or perceived technical breaches to regulation, and CASA have meted out some pretty aggressive responses to those businesses that have resulted in all manner of consequences, whether it be the closure of a business or whether it's the significant financial damaging of a business or whether it is the impeding of that business by way of limiting their approvals as a consequence of those actions. And and one of the things that I hear quite often in this is that CASA takes the view that ignorance by an operator with respect to the rules by which the regulations lay out of which these businesses can operate is no excuse. They will not tolerate a business being ignorant of what the rules say you can and cannot do. And so when the Ombudsman's finding came out that outlined that there was in fact no regulatory impediment to franchise AOCs, I sent the chairman of CASA a quick text message and I said very clearly that AOPA Australia will be publicly calling for Jonathan Alec to resign his position, Graham Crawford to resign his position, and Chris Monaghan to resign his position, because I fail, and I think that it's I think that this would be an accepted view. I don't believe that the industry can accept that 3 of the highest paid CASA executives that are there to administrate and to meter out the regulations in this country could have made such a fundamental mistake that they oversaw the regulator's pursuit of an operator and the eventual closure of that operator and not have known that there were no regulations prohibiting franchise AOCs. And I'll make one further comment, that if in fact they did know, then the consequences of them knowing and continuing with those actions, I think, are diabolical. But I don't feel that there could be any justification that these top-level executives who are paid enormous amounts of money by the Australian taxpayer to do this job could be making this kind of fundamental mistake. What's your thoughts?
Well, I'm the person that lived this experience, Ben. I had a business that had been operating for nearly 15 years. I've lost my business, I've lost my home, I've lost my whole I've lost everything as a result of this. I mean, it's cruel behaviour. It's unlawful behaviour. It's truly disgusting. But one of the things that concerns me is the lack of accountability. You know, I mean, CASA, the government set CASA adrift, if you like, as its own organisation. Well, the expectation is there'd be a level of board governance to keep these people in check. It's the same names that come up again and again. So I have to question, is the board badly intentioned or is the board ineffective? Because something's going on with that board. Honestly, Ben, they're impotent. I wrote to them for 6 months, got no response from them. So it needs a board providing good governance to keep these limited amount of personalities within CASA in check. They must leave the organisation. And something I'd say, Ben, the industry, the whole industry now, CASA's actually, you know, if the minister chooses to act on this and remove people who choose to act in a bullying and intimidating manner, he's got the most unique opportunity that the Civil Aviation Authority or Civil Aviation Safety Authority has ever had. There's an enormous pool of talent out there now because of the pandemic, an enormous pool of talent. Now's the time for a clean-up of CASA. Remove some people. And with the people I launch allegations against, Ben, I want to publicly have this out with them. You know, these aren't untruths. You know, I want to take them to task on this publicly. I invite them to come on here.
Well, look, obviously, Glenn, that's exactly what we would like to do. I think that the aviation industry would like to see a period of some real transparency. I think that the industry's owed that transparency, and it's time to see the people who are making these key decisions that are having such a horrific outcome. Those people really need to be seen in front of the camera lens by the media and by the industry, and we need to have the opportunity for them to respond as to why they are making the decisions that they are making, and if they are making decisions where they are being supported by other levels, which is why, you know, I communicated clearly to the chairman of CASA that I fail to believe in your case that the head legal representative of CASA could not have known that there was no regulatory prohibition on franchise AOC. And so, you know, as a person who's deeply interested in the future of this industry, and I think as a commentator on the industry, there are some pretty obvious questions that need to be asked of these public people. And let's not forget that. These are public people. They are persons of public interest. Our entire industry relies on them doing their job professionally and making sound decisions. And so if their decision-making is not sound and they are making decisions which are deeply damaging the industry, I think it's only appropriate that those people hand in their resignations and they leave.
Well, they're also absolutely, but they're choosing. They're making, you know, these aren't accidents. These are conscious decisions and actions that these people make. You know, Dr. Alec, you know, head of Legal International and Regulatory Affairs, Craig Martin, the executive manager of Regulatory Services and Surveillance. These are conscious decisions. They're not mistakes. They're choosing to breach strictly laid out procedures. When they took action against me, they bypassed administrative law, procedural fairness, natural justice, obligations on them in the PGP Act, obligations on them as public servants. They're choosing to step outside procedures. They're applying opinion. They have no safety case. So I've called on CASA again and again and again. With the action that you took against me that's had such a significant impact on me and my family and a lot of people around me, a lot of suppliers, a lot of people have been impacted. There is no safety case, Ben, and this is the important thing to understand. There's no safety case. So I call on CASA to put one forward. There's no regulatory breach. I'm dealing with a change of opinion by Dr. Alec and
that's a very important comment that you make, because I know you just made the comment that that Dr. Alec has made these breaches, and I think to clarify that, I don't think I'll say that he has made a breach or he has made a decision that he has known a breach. I think that is yet to be proven. I think that if we could sit Dr. Jonathan Alec down, he would say, well, the Ombudsman's determination is an opinion. And my opinion, this would be, I'm assuming I'm Dr. Alec right now, he would say, well, my opinion is actually contrary. And herein lies the problem. How is it that regulations in this country that we have to live and die by in business can simply be subject to the opinions of varying people? It's either legal or it's not legal. And I come back to the argument that I've always used on this ridiculous private pilot medical debacle, which is the denial of rights to the general aviation industry of a self-certified medical, whilst CASA at the same time goes out and says, well, we can allow recreational pilots who are licensed to the industry's lowest standard, flying aircraft that are built to the industry's lowest certification standard, are somehow a lower risk than private pilots trained to the highest private standards, flying FAR 23 certified general aviation airplanes built to the highest standard, that they're somehow more risky if we allow them to fly self-certified. And somewhere in that matrix, and again, what mirrors your case, is there's never been a safety case published by CASA that actually explains any of this, because it can't be explained. There is no explanation for what they're doing. But I'm sure somewhere someone has said, well, it's a legal opinion that we will do the following. And so really this is not good enough for the aviation industry. So it hasn't been good enough for your business. It's resulted in the loss of your business, and it needs to be addressed. So we've got a ruling from the Ombudsman.
Yes.
You've come out to have this conversation, not because you want the conflict with CASA, but because you are hoping that, number one, that the industry can learn from the process, number two, CASA can learn from the process, and three, the government can learn from the process. What's your next steps?
Well, my next steps now, I am proceeding with the action of defamation against CASA. That will proceed. And that was the direction to terminate me. And the defamation, my reputation, what this has done to my reputation, Ben, I'm embarrassed in front of, and I know people say to me, don't be embarrassed, Glenn, don't be embarrassed. And I appreciate that. But I'm the person walking in the shoes, Ben. I'm embarrassed in front of my mother-in-law, for my wife's, for her loss of her future security. I'm embarrassed in front of my children, who I've lost my business, my home, my ability to educate them, my ability to give them good healthcare, my ability to, got my son's 21st birthday coming up with no money in the bank, so I'm embarrassed in front of my family. I'm embarrassed in front of my peers, my workmates, my school community, my kids' parents. People wonder, what happened to Glenn's business? What happened to Glenn's house? Why did he lose his business? Why did he lose his house? So for me to explain it was because of CASA, the automatic assumption by people is that I've done something wrong. So what it's done to me mentally, financially, and emotionally, it has devastated me. I didn't even go to the air show last time because I was too embarrassed to walk around the Avalon Air Show until I get this out in public and I can air this. So the defamation thing is enormous for me. It's an enormous burden. It's put me into a very dark place. So I will pursue that action. Now that the Commonwealth Ombudsman's had his finding, I've asked CASA to sit down and meet with me in a well-intentioned manner. That is my first preference. If they refuse to, I will proceed with litigation against what's called negligent misstatement. And a little bit on that negligent misstatement, that case. I don't mind opening this up to CASA's information. But negligent misstatements, when basically you get bad advice or erroneous advice, and it could have been avoided, put in a layman's terms. I've got a bit more about it on P-Prune. But remember, CASA said to me, Glenn, you need to follow this process or your business cannot continue to trade. I then attended over a 2-year period working with a group of CASA people to 600 CASA requirements because I had to if I was going to keep my business. The transition date came around, I was ready. CASA came back and did the highest audit on me, which is a level 1 audit. I got through that audit beautifully. CASA recommended people to join my organisation. This was running beautifully. My issue was when I got a new flight operations inspector by the name of, and I'll say it because it's the truth, it's public interest, I've published it before. I got advised that I was to have a new flight operations inspector called Brad Lacey. I wrote to CASA within 24 hours. I have the email here, CASA have it on record. I requested a one-on-one on the record meeting with the regional manager to express my concerns that that individual would bring harm to me and my business. And sure enough, only a couple of months later, after that change went ahead with Brad Lacey, then it all started. And so the person that was managing you went from C1 to C2 or C2 to C3? Correct. So the CASA operate. Now this system's being pulled apart because it's been proven not to work. So CASA is now dismantling this system after many, many years and coming up with a new system. But I used to operate under what were called certificate management teams. In the Victoria, Tasmania region, we had CMT 1, 2 and 3. I'd operated for about 10 years under CMT 2, Certificate Management Team 2, a group of about half a dozen CASA personnel who were specialists in each of their respective areas. after a relationship of a decade with an impeccable, very professional CMT, I was changed over to CMT3 without, I have no idea why. I suggest as part of the engineered process, because as I say, I went to CASA immediately, requested a one-on-one, and importantly, Ben, it was an on-the-record meeting. CASA have this on record. I didn't want that new FOI oversighting me. Sure enough, the change went ahead and bang, the trouble started.
Did CASA give you any explanation as to why that they would not, I guess, entertain or provide an allowance to have a different FOI supervise your operation?
Ben, they didn't, and I can tell you the answer. The answer was because, these are big allegations, Ben. These are big allegations, but I stand behind everything I say. Everything I say. That it was vindictive and vexatious. There's no doubt about it.
That is a very strong allegation to make, that the individual was targeting you. And again, I would be just very careful on what you say, Glenn, because there is no doubt that CASA Legal is going to be sitting around watching this video, trying to work out a way on how they can silence you. And in fact, I'd like to make this before you go any further, I'd like to make this statement. CASA's actions in the coming weeks and months in relation to this issue should define for every participant of this industry, without any question or equivocation, in total clarity, the kind of people we are dealing with. Now, if they come after you, Glenn, and they choose to throw lawyers at you as a consequence of what you're saying, then every single person in this industry should be writing a direct letter to the Prime Minister's office of this country demanding that the executive team at CASA be suspended, because it would be, to do such a thing would just simply be confirming that the regulator is incapable of sitting down in good intention to try and resolve this issue. And I've said it to you before, Glenn, CASA appear to have a problem in which they can't acknowledge when they mess up. And they can't bring themselves to find a way to sit down and bring the person that they've obviously made such a horrible mistake with, bring them in and find a way to resolve it without that person or business being forced to spend their life savings or borrow from everyone that they know to defend their reputation and their good name. And so I think in relation to this, we as an industry should be watching very carefully. Now, I find it awfully insulting, and I have said this in my last broadcast, that the chairman of CASA, after I interviewed you, contacted me, and I thought that the chairman was calling me to potentially ask me how a meeting could be facilitated so that the board could potentially sit down and understand these issues, as I was certain, having met you, Glenn, and spent some time with you, that there was a great deal to this story that needed to be gone through. But instead, that telephone conversation was nowhere near what it was about. It was really just an opportunity to chastise AOPA, because we've decided to stand with the industry and to provide a powerful voice to the industry in saying enough is enough, CASA. And it is time that you are cleaned up. It is time that the rot and that the toxic cultures and the bullying and the intimidation and the mishandling of the industry ends, so that we can move forward. So everyone in the industry needs to watch and keep their eye out on what is going on. And if, Glenn, something starts to happen, as people are saying here, maybe there'll need to be a GoFundMe set up and a big petition set up. But I just want to put that on the record, that I think we're about to see in definition what type of regulator is looking after this industry. Go ahead.
Yeah, look, I believe, and I appreciate the offer of the GoFundMe. I mean, I've got this far because of the support. Like, a GoFundMe page was set up and raised $50,000 for me to get some initial assessments of this case. Now, I believe, and I am talking to the legal firms, I think that I'll get such a strong case out of this when the lawyers finish reviewing this, that I'll be able to pursue litigation funding. So I'm convinced I can continue this and take this through. But my just hope is that somebody intervenes and there's some good intention. All I'm trying to do, Ben, is, you know, get my family back where they were, trying to get the businesses back that were impacted by this. In fact, ultimately, I'd like to go and rebuild APTA. And if I can just digress a little bit, well, not digress, but on the topic, you know, I just want to talk about this terminology that the CASA used of franchised AOCs, borrowed AOCs, etc. I just want to talk a little bit more about what APTA was, if that's okay, if I can have sort of 4 or 5 minutes, the actual intent of APTA. So APTA was, I had my business Melbourne flight training, the flying school, the new regulations came along. Now I moved my Melbourne flight training approval up, and the intention was to put flying schools operating under the APTA umbrella. Now I spent an enormous amount of money then, okay? We had CASA will talk about oversight, governance, direct control, and these sort of things. I built a system, not me personally, but we contracted a system to be built to oversight this group of flying schools called Flight School Manager. This was a very powerful system, Ben. This was probably the most advanced system of any flying school in the country. To give you some examples of what it did, it held all of the students' training records in this system, but it also held all of the pilots' flight and duty time. So if one of our pilots went and worked at Latrobe Valley or Ballarat or the Moorabbin base, his flight and duties would get held into that central system. Now it contained our training records, predictive maintenance, all of our maintenance tracking, all of our proficiency checks, our pilots, when flight and duty times, everything was contained in the system. For the first time ever in Australia, Ben, I gave CASA full access to our total and complete systems. So CASA could sit in the CASA office and they could just log in. They could check flight and duty times, what planes were out, what outstanding maintenance was on aircraft. They could check everything, our meeting notes, our notices to our airmen. Every single part of that operation was contained in that system, and CASA had full access to it for the first time of any aviation organisation in Australia. Very high levels of accountability. But the idea about, I just want to jump over to an aero club. Let's consider an aero club, because I had Ballarat Aero Club and Latrobe Valley Aero Club, a number of aero clubs as members of APTA. Okay. An aero club, I haven't worked in an aero club, and I'm probably going to offend some aero clubs here because I chose never to work in an aero club because I know how difficult aero clubs are to run. Typically in aero clubs, a group of local people have a very keen enthusiasm in aviation. They come to the aero club. They want to be organising flyaways and barbecues, and they want to be paying their fuel bills, and they want to be running the aero club. They don't want to be rewriting manuals. They don't want to be doing audits. They don't have the expertise to do that. In the aero clubs, these are insurance people and farmers and business people in town who gravitate to these aero clubs for a life experience. What APTA was about, for the first time ever, was very clearly separating regulatory compliance and the safety function, very separate from the commercial function. The commercial function belonged to the aero club. You collect your money for your fuel, you pay your fuel bill, your gas, your water, electricity. I'm going to take all of your safety functions, and I'm going to take all of your regulatory compliance, and I'm going to audit you daily, every single flight school. We're going to meet. We're going to transfer these skills between the different bases. If you want to develop instructor ratings down at Ballarat, we can transfer someone from our Moorabbin base to Ballarat to develop those. It was about a pooled use of resources. I set APTA up for 3 reasons, and CASA have the website. CASA knows this. I had my business Melbourne flight training. I set APTA up to increase safety, increase regulatory compliance, and protect Australian-owned businesses, and most particularly in regional areas. That was the APTA charter. That was what was on the website. We looked after safety, regulatory compliance. You look after the business, and the people who were members of APTA will attest to this. What they found was a very strict regime that they now operate under, because the challenge of commercial versus safety, that was all separated. I had no commercial pressure on me. We made safety and regulatory compliance decisions, and if the schools didn't like it or the aero clubs didn't like it, it was tough titties, because we implemented that very, very rigidly. So it was a big change of culture. But the idea was to free aero clubs up to be aero clubs and to let them thrive.
So absolutely clearly, Glenn, that the outcome of this is actually to create a safer industry, which is what the CASA objective is. The CASA objective is to provide safety for the Australian aviation industry and for the flying Australian public. And so it certainly does leave everybody shaking their heads, nodding their heads, and all wondering, how the hell did this end up happening? How could such a colossal mistake have been made by the senior team at CASA to have allowed their subordinate management to come after an Australian business and effectively force its closure through forcing holds on your business, not allowing your business to proceed forward, and in doing so, lowering aviation safety at the same time. It's incomprehensible.
It blows me away, Ben. It really does. I mean, you know, we've seen a system now, you know, and this is all on record. I wrote to CASA, and this is probably what they back up a little bit. You know, I've been in the industry for 25 years, Ben. It used to be an Australian-owned industry. More than half the flight training in this country now, more than half of the flight training in this country is delivered by foreign-owned companies. It's mind-blowing. Flight training, we should be able to do that. And that's what APTA was about. It was about, and CASA, it was about me getting a group of well-intentioned flying schools together with an enormous capability and taking on these international organisations. It's people have lost jobs, businesses have closed, members of APTA have shut down. You know, White Star Aviation, it's shut down. That owner's lost all his investment. Simjet, a fantastic sim operator that was going to bring a 737 simulator into the organisation, run by a highly experienced ex-military airline pilot. That was one of them. His business has collapsed because of this. When CASA gave me only 7 days notice of operation, all these businesses collapsed, Ben. People lost investment, jobs, Australian. It's
okay.
Sad.
So, Glenn, we're going to be limited on time, and I have assured a number of people who've asked, including a couple of senators who asked for a few more of these details to be fleshed out. I want to come back to the allegation that you have made, which is that you believe that your FOI set out on a pathway which ultimately victimized your business and potentially yourself. Why do you feel that is the case?
I think it's interesting, Ben. I think, look, I've been a long-term, as you know, the CASA Part 61, Part 141 and Part 42 legislation was all introduced, you know, a decade behind schedule, hundreds of millions of dollars over budget. But I'm very clearly on the record and P-Prune over many years previously, and these could be looked up as part of any investigation. But I think it was my predictions that there was no safety benefit to this. It would cost Australian jobs. It would cost businesses, destroy aviation in rural areas. I think, you know, I went in the Australian newspaper and I was quite public in the way I opposed this, the way this whole program went, Ben. So I think that and the passage of time proved me right, Ben. The passage of time saw the country flying schools close down. It saw the foreign penetration into our flight training industry. So I think the passage of time I've been proven right. And I think, honestly, I'm probably an embarrassment to CASA. Yeah, I just think that I've highlighted the deficiencies in CASA and, you know, elements within CASA, not, you know, the 900 people.
Well, you know, Glenn, I'd like to say that from my perspective, and I better just move my camera back here. I would like to say from my perspective, I don't see this. I would love to be able to say to you that I don't see the behaviour, but unfortunately, with a lot of the interviews that we've been doing, and keep this in perspective, this is there are aviation industry participants that are coming forward to do this program now and to sit down and talk about what's going on because of that most famous quote: "When good men do nothing, bad things," right? And so people are coming forward and they are starting to speak up. And I've been really overwhelmed at a lot of the stuff that's surfacing. You know, even the young guy Shannon Baker who came forward last week and was speaking about what's happened to him, and the investigator who was appointed to his particular case. And I've looked at much of the material, and you can see there's a problem with the investigator. Yeah. The investigator's trying to achieve something, it's like that atypical bad detective that doesn't know how to solve the crime, so he'll just go and find the evidence to fit what he thought happened. And so, it's sad that this is going on, but it's going on at the highest levels inside of CASA. And an example of this is Graham Crawford, who's effectively the deputy DAS. He's second in charge of the organisation. He's one of the highest paid guys working for CASA. I assume that you can only get these jobs as this possible. I don't know in detail, but I assume he's the second highest paid. If you're the deputy DAS, chances are your income is slightly lower than the DAS, but chances are also that you're regarded as a pretty switched on person in relation to your understanding of regulation, your understanding of the role of the regulator, what the regulator is responsible for doing, and its responsibility to industry. And I guess as a demonstration of the attitude, 12 months ago in January, I gave an interview to Insurance Industry News. I was contacted by Insurance Industry News, who asked me the questions and said, Ben, there appears to be a problem brewing within the aviation industry, and we are getting the sense that aviation insurers are really going to be looking at getting out of aviation. What's driving this? And I gave an honest interview. And I said, we've got a multitude of issues going on, of which one of the significant issues is that Australia's aviation industry has become over-regulated, that the industry is unable to innovate, and the word innovate is actually quite critical, unable. You think about this, the business of insurers is really only twofold. It's to insure against loss and to insure against repair. The loss issue is not a problem. The repair issue is a major problem. How does the insurance industry continue to insure aircraft for repair when the costs of repair are going through the roof because the insurance companies can't get affordable repair services? Now, blind Freddie could tell you in this industry that the reason that the cost of aircraft repairs are going through the roof is that we have fewer maintenance outfits, fewer LAMEs. We've got next to no apprentices coming into the system anymore. We've lost over half the training facilities for apprentices. I was told a staggering statistic today that if it is true, that in the last so many years, there's only been one LAME license issued in the Northern Territory. Think of all of the general aviation aircraft and activity that typically went on in the top end of Australia, and one license. Now, I don't know if that number is entirely accurate, but it was told to me today by someone who is very well respected amongst the aviation industry that this is the case. I mean, here's the Deputy DAS of CASA who sends me an email after I do this interview with the insurance industry saying that the current situation with aviation insurers is in fact a canary in the coal mine. CASA and the minister should be taking notice of what is going on, because the way in which the industry is being managed by those with their hands on the power levers is wrong. It's broken. And so instead of contacting me to say, hey, Ben, you've got some interesting perspectives on this, I was contacted to basically have a go at me to say effectively that CASA was tired of motherhood statements, that I'm unable to justify and prove my comments, and that if AOPA wants to be respected, we should somehow detail an essay every time I go out and make a comment. Well, my response to that is, let me ask you a few questions. In the last 12 months since that interview, has CASA sought to put together a task force to bring industry leaders together to understand the effectiveness of engineering regulations and whether we are missing out on opportunities for innovation? Has CASA sought to bring together maintenance and engineering companies to understand any of these problems? And Glenn, do you know what the answer is? There's been no action. Oh. The second highest paid guy in CASA is sending Ben Morgan at AOPA a letter to chastise Ben Morgan because he's talking about the problem. And by the way, in those responses, I continually say to CASA, why don't you appoint Ben Morgan and AOPA to the CASA consultancy panels like the DAS ASAP, where I can start working with you and I can help you. And in 12 months, I think I sent 3 or 4 of these requests, and every single request is either ignored or I'm told basically piss off.
Yeah.
And so how serious are these people at the top of CASA in managing the industry and wanting to understand how they can fix these problems if they're running around doing this all the time? And I see that, Glenn, with what you're saying, that when CASA decides they just don't like someone, it wouldn't matter if you had the answers to their biggest problems. They'll go out of their way to avoid you or to cause you as much difficulty as they can.
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting when you bring up an interesting point there. You know, before this Part 61, and CASA have this on record, the emails are there, it's on written record. You know, on a similar point to what you touched on there, before CASA introduced Part 61, 141 and 142, I wrote to CASA on a few occasions, spoke to my regional team. I said, look, I'll tell you what I'll do, and this is in writing. Take a CASA FOI, I'll pay his salary for 12 months up to $180,000. The CASA had this on record. He said, work in my organisation. This is prior to this legislation coming in. I said, I will design the manuals and all of the procedures with this CASA personnel that I fund. Then at the end of it, I will make those templates and those documents available for free to the entire industry. Because what that will do, that will save the cost of the schools doing it. It'll give us one standardised system. And I offered to pay. It would cost them nothing, and it would have saved so many businesses. But they, just as you say, they steadfastly refuse to take on any assistance. But that's their own fears and insecurities, Ben. You know, these are things to be aware of. You know, we're pilots. We look out for these things. It's CASA's fears and insecurities that actually make them so resistant to continuous improvement.
So, Glenn, you make the allegation that this CASA FOI, and you were concerned. You say to us that you went on the record with CASA so that it would be recorded, that you were concerned that this person would be appointed and that there would be trouble ensuing. Trouble then followed.
Oh, yeah. All sorts of trouble, Ben, all sorts of trouble. And I'll just go back to it. So this person then came into the organisation, okay? Now, I'm going to have to jump around a little bit here, but they did a number of things against me. The first thing you have to understand is, Ben, they came with no prior notice and they put restrictions on my business's ability to trade. Okay, I only had about 7 days certainty of operation. What coronavirus has done to businesses, coronavirus was uninvited. It's led to the shutdown of businesses for weeks and weeks. Well, I endured this for 8 months, Ben. Same thing. I didn't ask for it. I didn't know it was coming. It was just bang, put restriction on the ability to trade. So I couldn't enroll. I'm a flying school. As soon as CASA put those restrictions on my ability to trade, I can't enroll students. This went on for 8 months, Ben. Now, I can't enroll a student in a 3-month course if CASA's only given me 7 days certainty of operations. All of a sudden, my suppliers start to get concerned. Okay, this business has only got 7 days operations. Think of my staff, Ben. I had an impeccable group of staff, and anybody that's a member of APTA will know the quality of the staff that I had in that organisation. They were fantastic, well-intentioned, professional and competent. So all of a sudden they get insecurity. Like, the business has only got 7 days. I couldn't do any marketing. I couldn't do any advertising. It was a registered training organisation. You can't take on students if you can't knowingly complete the course. So that restrictions on the business's ability to trade. CASA went back to the aviation ruling that the Ombudsman's now found is wrong. CASA then came up with, and I call them absolutely falsified audit results. Let me give you a couple of examples. CASA wrote to me and said, Glenn, we want you to address your deficiencies in your flight school manager system and the flight and duty exceedances. There were no flight and duty exceedances, Ben. And I called on CASA. I've got all the emails here. I called on CASA repeatedly. I said, if you're claiming that there's a flight and duty exceedance, you must be able to name the pilot. And I wrote to them again and again and again. CASA made an allegation of flight and duty exceedances, but they couldn't name the pilot. It's ludicrous. There can't be a flight and duty exceedance if you can't nominate the pilot. CASA highlighted to me, they said that the CASA audit results were used as the basis of their legal finding. I said, there are no CASA audit results. I never got them. This is months after the audit. CASA realised they never wrote up the audit results. This is 2.5 months after the audit. CASA gave me a commitment. We haven't written up the audit results. We'll do them over the weekend and we're going to get them to you on Monday. The CASA audit results turned up on the Monday or Tuesday. Completely false allegations in them there. Completely false. And they are unable to justify any of them. I had the team sit down. They would get the whole certificate management team were going to get me for false advertising because my signage didn't meet the size requirements. I said to CASA, with 6 or 7 CASA personnel, I said, there are no regulations about the size of signage or anything. And they go, yes, they are. Yes, they are. And I said, look, I've been working in the industry a long time. I've never seen these. And in my mind, I thought, these guys are actually confused. I think they're actually confused with regulations about aircraft call sign markings, not flying school markings. They say to me, oh, there are regulations. I said, okay, well, if you could produce them to me. The next day, they owned up, there are no regulations on signage. I mean, So false, restrictions on the business's ability to trade, false allegations of audit results that they can't justify.
Just had it fed back to me that the Deputy DAS is on, if this number's correct, Glenn, if this number's correct,
yes,
I mean, I am just shocked. 503,000 Australian dollars per annum for our Deputy DAS, who does not understand that the current regulations are stopping the industry from playing a role in being a leader in aircraft component manufacturing and just about every other. I mean, it's diabolical. 500,000 Australian dollars for that level of output, frankly.
Oh, yeah. You think of the quality of people. You think of the quality of people out there. For a $500,000 salary, the quality of people out in industry now because as a result of this pandemic. What $500,000 per annum could buy? What $300,000 per annum? It needs well-intentioned people. That's what the industry needs. It needs good.
$500,000 would probably buy a little compassion.
Compassion, competency, good intention. Should get a lot of bang for your buck for that sort of money.
I'm genuinely shocked, Glenn. I mean, if that number's correct, and we might put an information request off to confirm that that's correct, but $500,000 for our Deputy DAS, and to be receiving emails from the deputy chastising myself, saying that there's no way that AOPA, or he didn't say that, he actually said that AOPA should justify its claims and motherhood statements, and if we want the industry to respect us, we should basically prove every single thing that we say about decline. Well, I'm sorry, if you're the Deputy DAS of CASA, you should already have your finger on this pulse, and you should be out there amongst the aviation industry, speaking to the people on the shop floor. Go for a walk through the engineering shops and talk to the lamies, talk to the apprentices. How many apprentices have approached me, Glenn, in the last 4 years saying that they've given up on the Australian system? Many of them saying it's just so broken, it's not working, and they've given up and gone to other trades. I was walking, I walked the workshop floor in Bankstown of one particular operator, and this guy, he's about 67 years of age, and he's a sheet metal guy, and he says to me, "Ben, I've only got a few years left," but he said, "Have a good look around." He said, "There's no young people here." He said, he goes, we have no kids wanting to come into this industry anymore, because what are we providing them? He said, what incentive have they got? He said, we can't even manufacture a part in this country and navigate the complexity of getting the part approved in a timely and cost-efficient way, that when you're at the end of that process, you could actually sell that part for a reasonable price and make a living out of doing it.
Right.
And Deputy Director Crawford says that everything's fine. Well, you know what? I mean, if everything's so good, Glenn, if everything's so good with CASA, then why are we in the situation we're in? Why are we in this situation? If for $500,000 you're buying yourself the smartest guys in the world, and I've got to be honest with you, mate, $500,000 buys a pretty shit hot executive, right?
Absolutely.
Why then? It frustrates me to no end that why have we got to continue to have an industry in decline if we've got these clever people earning so much money? And if they're not clever, let's get rid of them. Let's just get rid of them, and let's get some people into the system that can actually look at situations like yours, Glenn, and can recognize that this needs to be fixed without forcing you to then pursue this to the end of the earth through the courts to get it fixed. It is such a shame. It is such a black mark on this current government and successive governments for allowing this culture within this organisation to devolve to the point that it is. I'm sorry, I'm probably ranting on this. I can hear several people in the industry already saying, "Shut up, Ben," but it just boils my blood that the hardworking Australians have got to be treated the way that they are in this industry by people who are paid such enormous slabs of money to do a good job. It's not hard. It's not hard. You know, Crawford, you've got one job, mate. One job. Make the industry work and use your time to the maximum of your potential to better this industry, and we'll love you for it. But, you know, what we're getting right now, no one can respect what's happening right now. Sorry, Glenn. So CASA have, through this FOI and through this process, it reduced your business to a point where your business just could not continue to trade. It was basically closure time.
Well, they put the restrictions on the business's ability to trade, and I've documented this on PPRU, and I've started posting some of these letters on there and will continue to do so. I notified CASA with those restrictions on my business's ability to trade, it would cost me $10,000 a week to continue operation, because I had a group of staff depending on me. I had my revenue streams were denied. CASA also wrote to my customers and told them that the whole concept was in question, so that destroyed customer confidence. I couldn't enrol new customers. I thought that I'd resolve this thing. CASA told me they would resolve it. After 8 months, at costs of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, you know, my house was gone. Ben, I'm not trying to sit here. Mrs. All can be verified. I sat down with my accountant, Ben. He said, Glenn, you've got a couple of options. You're either going to have to start making staff redundant or you're going to lose your house. And I sat down and my whole family, we decided to lose the house, Ben. I went right to my very last day with that business. I didn't make anybody redundant. I paid them their salaries. Admittedly, there's a couple of staff that are owed a couple of weeks' salary, but I've just, you know, I lost everything trying to fight this battle, Ben. Everything. You know, we went into last Christmas, mate. There wasn't a single present under the tree. My family now, we wouldn't have $500 to our name. That's a fact. I've lost everything: cars, home, business, livelihood, job, reputation, everything gone. I'm out of the industry now. I work in an entirely different industry. You know, and I guess I'm of two minds. There's a part of me that finds the whole aviation industry just too traumatic and I want nothing to do with it. I'm too embarrassed meeting my peers and people in the industry, and I want to go and start. The other side of me says, no, take CASA to task on this and actually rebuild APTA. That's what the criteria is. I'm going to want to go back and say, you've now determined this was unlawful conduct. You had no right to stop me doing it. You've drained me of resources. I want compensation because I want to come back. I want to get those same personnel, those same policies, those same procedures, and I want to rebuild APTA, and I want to build that, and I want to take the foreign-owned sector of the flight training industry on and actually build something good like I had a couple of years ago.
I certainly, I sense that drive in you, Glenn, and that passion, and I'm so glad to see that it's still alive. And I know many people here are already commenting saying, you've not got anything to be ashamed of or otherwise. And you know, let me tell you straight up, you absolutely have nothing to be ashamed of. It takes a very strong character. It takes a very strong character who has strong moral courage to stand up and do what's right, to stand up against a national safety authority and call out the bad culture, to call out the toxic environment, to call out the bullying, to call out the abuses of power. Strong moral courage. And not everyone is prepared to stand up and be that person. And I think that the industry can see on full display the type of character and the type of integrity that you have in sitting up tall and firm and saying this should not be going on and it has to stop. And I do hope, I really do hope that you do get your dues and that compensation is paid to you, because what took place should not have happened. What I fear will happen, Glenn, what I fear will happen is that CASA will now pull out all the stops and they will go to all lengths imaginable to now fight this, and they will manipulate as aggressively as they can to try and produce an outcome that in some unimaginable way will justify what they did so that they can save face rather than sit down. And I think that this is actually quite important. And I think in one sense, it's actually quite important that it's going on, because I think the minister, I think the Prime Minister, I think the Senate RRAT, I think that every MP, every single person who is an elected official of any community, aviation community group anywhere in the country will now get to see firsthand the type of people who are running the aviation safety regulator. And this is their defining moment. This is the defining moment. as to whether they will fix what they have done and do the right thing by the people of Australia, or whether they will just simply look after themselves and their $500,000 salaries and bog down and try to go into full-on defence justification mode to cover their asses. And that's all that will happen here. There are two possible scenarios. One, they contact you, Glenn, and they invite you in and say, look, we've messed this up. You're good intentioned. We understand you want to resolve this. We want to resolve it. We've made a mistake. Pull out that checkbook, sign that check, hand it to you, and allow you to go and set up your business and come back into this aviation industry. Because I tell you what, Glenn, Michael McCormack famously found himself sitting in an aircraft with an individual at Moorabbin Airport and famously said, we need more of these people in this industry.
Yep.
And I'm not going to name the person, but our Deputy Prime Minister said, we need more of these people. No, we need more Glen Buckleys. We need people in this industry that are going to show incredible integrity and fortitude. And so, you know, I really do hope, mate, that this situation resolves. And I hope and I pray that CASA actually do the right thing and send a very powerful message to this industry that they're a responsible regulator and that they believe in being responsible and that they act responsible and they deliver responsible outcomes, because it would be a defining, powerful moment for all of us in industry to be able to say, good, they've done the right thing. They actually care. So I don't know how much more I can labour that point with it, but you can kind of see my frustration, mate. My board were like, Ben, for God's sake, you need to be careful. But, you know, it does fire me up because this industry is so small, Glenn. It is so small. We need each other. We need to support one another. We need to protect each other because, God, if left to their own devices, we'd all be out of the industry tomorrow. I want to come back to some more questions here. Obviously, the restrictions literally stopped your ability to trade. This was not a decision you wanted. You tried your damnedest to try and overcome that and say, you know, there's got to be another way. I want to resolve this. All of that was denied to you. You then end up in a situation where you have no choice. The house has got to be sold to continue paying the staff because there's no income coming in. But then you arrive at that fateful day where the decision is, I now have to sell this business that's not even trading now, which devastated the value of that company. And you and I had a whole raft of conversations at the time that took place. And I know how hard you were working to try and find a viable pathway there. But you've sold this business for just a percentage of what you had invested in it and what its real value was. And you're now working for that company. And really one of the next quite abhorrent things takes place. And, you know, when I heard you tell me this, Glenn, I couldn't believe it. I could believe it, but I also could not believe that such an action would take place. Maybe share with our viewers what happened then.
So I've sold the business. So the business, you know, was probably, you know, I don't know, let's say a business valued around $4 million. I'd incurred so much debt. I sold it for $180,000, being the value of the debt only. Walked away with not 1 cent from the business. Obtained employment because I was still the CASA approved CEO of the business and the CASA approved head of operations. Then this email comes to lands on my new employer's desk from the CASA region manager. Hi, I won't say the person's, I'll call him Bill in this. Hi, Bill. I understand that Mr. Buckley remains as APTA's deputy head of operations. This is no longer tenable with the comments that Mr. Buckley is making publicly. Please confirm APTA's intention in relation to Mr. Buckley as the deputy who. And my employment was terminated. Now, with that,
a CASA representative sends an email directly to your new employer and outlines that CASA is unhappy with the comments that you were making publicly, which were comments that were being made about the way in which CASA applied their regulatory powers to you, and you were publicly holding them to account and I've read much of your correspondence, and I'll agree with one fact here that, Glenn, you're passionate about it. But look, I've been accused of that. There's people go, oh, Ben, you're too hard. You know, some issues you've gone out too hard on. Well, you know, whether I'm too hard or too soft, does it matter? Public accountability is actually critical if we want a responsible regulator. People need to know the things that are going on. So I imagine that was what was really motivating and driving you. But from that, this CASA person has contacted your employer and basically said, no, we don't want this guy here, move him on.
Correct. Now that position that I have, remember, I'm not just an employee. That's a CASA approved position. I'm a CASA approved CEO, and I'm a CASA approved head of operations, the old chief flying instructor. I've been doing this job in this business I've sold, for 15 years. I've got an industry leading record of safety and compliance. For them to come and do out, that's just obscene. It's a breach of administrative law, natural justice, procedural fairness. If CASA are going to, you don't just send an email to your employer and tell them that your employment's untenable. It's show cause notices and there's procedures.
So, Glenn, one of the questions that's obviously hitting my mind right now is that this CASA employee obviously made this or undertook this direction to contact your employer.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, did that employee of CASA receive that directive from someone higher up the food chain inside of CASA?
And I'd love to know that, and I don't know the answer to that, Ben. I guess what I do know is that a culture was allowed to pervade in the organisation that facilitates that type of conduct. So for somebody to feel empowered to be able to send someone at a regional manager level to feel empowered to write a letter to an employer to say that somebody's position is untenable based on comments that they're making publicly, they couldn't operate unless there was a culture in the organisation that facilitates that. So I don't know.
And Glenn, the regional manager, the regional manager was the Victorian regional manager who was looking after you. And I think in the interest for our members and industry supporters that are watching the program, shortly after your last interview with AOPA, I should note to the industry that CASA's Victorian manager, Mr. Jason McHeiser, resigned his position and has left the employment of CASA. Now, we don't know if that departure from CASA has anything to do with your particular situation, but I think in the interests of our industry and in the interests of transparency to the industry, CASA has a responsibility here to inform the industry if Mr. McHeiser's resignation had anything to do with your particular situation. And it is a strong area of public interest that the public has an expectation to know if the delegated people responsible for metering out CASA's regulatory powers has potentially become involved in something that he shouldn't have, then we have a right as an industry to know that. We need to know whether the departures, anyone departing from CASA is departing as a result of anything positive or negative. And I think that that is actually quite critical, because we as the industry need to see if there are people coming out of the regulator that have done the wrong thing. I think people have a right to know who they are. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And they need to be held accountable. You know, they must be held accountable. If people abuse their power and breach procedures, particularly when they work for, you know, we've got to bear in mind, you know, CASAs, they operate under the Australian Coat of Arms, Ben. You know, these people under, you know, which is probably the highest standard of any organisation, like, you know, operate under the Australian Coat of Arms. It's a government department. It's Australia's world-renowned safety regulator. I mean, a lot of obligations come on people to act professional to the highest standards of ethics and conduct. And they now they're not mistakes. They choose to abuse this power. You know, this is Dr. Jonathan Alec. They choose not to follow the rules and regulations. They choose to act vindictively and vexatiously. And as I just want to reiterate,
Glenn, I would just like to reiterate, and I think it's just, again, I want to be very clear on this, that the allegation that you have made that the Victorian regional manager contacted your employer and detailed that CASA did not consider you what was the exact wording?
The exact word in his email, which I have a copy of. Hi, I understand that Mr. Buckley remains as APTA Deputy Head of Operations. And there's actually no such role as a Deputy Head of Operations, the Head of Operations role. This is no longer tenable with the comments that Mr. Buckley is making publicly. This is no longer tenable with the comments of Mr. Buckley. Please confirm APTA's intentions in relation to Mr. Buckley as Deputy Who. That came through at 2:14 on Tuesday, 27th of the 8th of 2019. I was over chatting to an air ambulance pilot at the time, and at about 5:30, about 3 hours later, my employment was terminated.
Well, and again, what this comes back to, Glenn, is that if you had been given an opportunity to meet with Mr. Tony Matthews as the chairman of the CASA board, who is directly responsible for the ethical conduct of his organisation. There is no question. He is the chairman of the board of CASA. The buck stops with Mr. Tony Matthews. That had you been given the opportunity to meet with Mr. Matthews, to provide the clear evidence that shows that your allegation that the Victorian regional manager did this, that it's only reasonable that that person face an appropriate level of investigation, and if there was a wrongdoing found, that person face consequences for that wrongdoing.
Absolutely.
And yet you were denied that opportunity. That opportunity has never been afforded you to be able to sit down and to have these conversations. And so again, you know, as a person in that position, you must feel like justice just does not prevail for people within the industry at all. It's just not available to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben, like someone from CASA FOI lost his job for hitching a ride on a helicopter. So they've got accountability when they want it. So that bloke gets the arse and loses his job, but yet somebody else can apply their opinion, destroy my business, other businesses. Remember, 4 or 5 businesses went under with this, come up with falsified audit results, you know, use the wrong legislation, can't support allegations that they make. There's no accountability. It's because they're the executive management.
I've said this before. CASA have made the statement that the world's 6th best safety regulator, and it appears that time and time again, Glenn, they go out of their way to prove it. And this is certainly another example of that. And it really is shameful stuff. I'm gonna say it one more time. $500,000, $500,000 for this kind of stuff to be going on your watch, Mr. Crawford. $500,000.
It's absurd.
What is going on in Aviation House? What is going on in Aviation House that the industry is burning, but the emperors appear to be playing? What is going on? $500,000 should be buying us a little bit of attention to detail and some level of accountability for this. I'm going to keep, you know, it's going to be my new slogan, $500,000. It's just shameful stuff. So obviously the Southern Regional Manager is a, what do you say? I'm trying to think of something to say, Glenn. What do you say to it? Are you just You
know, Ben, these people, I will say, these people, they really, you know, I know this, they don't have the confidence of people in CASA. The employees in CASA are not, you know, Dr. Alec, Mr. Crawford, and Craig Martin do not have the confidence of the employees within CASA. That's a fact. I know that. I've been contacted. Under freedom of information, I've requested a report that was done into the culture of CASA, which I'm expecting to have released soon. Surveying was done of the culture, the CASA within culture, and I'll receive that very short. And that will be published on PPRU and Auntie Prue as well. That's provided copy, obviously.
Obviously, the second phase of this Ombudsman's investigation is going to look at the issue of the CASA Victorian Southern Manager in relation to the allegations that you have made and the documentation that you have that clearly says that this is what he did. If that comes back with a finding that what took place was basically illegal, that it is really illegal. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. Is it illegal for CASA to contact your employer and say, we want you sacked? Is that a power that CASA has, Glenn?
Well, I don't think it's a power that they've got. And if they did have that power anyway, it's got to be used obviously on safety grounds, which there's no safety case. But there's also, you know, in CASA's own procedures, there are strict policies to, you know, procedures to be followed when CASA make that decision. These were completely bypassed. As I say, this is requirements of administrative law and natural justice and procedural fairness. Has to be a basis for a decision like that.
Is procedural fairness and natural justice a real thing? Have you seen it?
Not in CASA, I haven't, no. But that's what I'm trying to achieve. Right. You know, if CASA can get well-intentioned and follow their own procedures, then the industry will benefit enormously. So that's where we're going with this.
And Glenn, if they phone you up tomorrow and they say to you, come in, we'd like to resolve this and settle it up, would you do that?
Yeah, I would do. Yeah, I would do, Ben. I know that might sound, I want to get on with my life, whether that either be inside aviation or outside aviation. I want this to come to an end. I really do. It needs to come to an end. I've been dealing with this for 2 years. It's taken enormous toll on me. It really has, and my family and businesses around me and business owners. So I do want it to end. So the most expeditious means to end it is to sit down and have well-intentioned discussion. But if CASA choose not to do that path, I can absolutely guarantee you, Ben, I'm not going away. This will be carried through to an independent determination. Once a lawyer or a judge rather sits and looks at this case, or the Commonwealth Ombudsman, I'll accept their opinion. That will be enough for me. I just want someone to look at this. Even the people I raise allegations against, I'm raising strong allegations, probably the strongest allegations that have ever been launched against a public servant in the public arena like this, really. And I'm talking falsified audit results, misfeasance, malfeasance, negligent misstatement. These people are entitled. Dr. Alex entitled to it. Craig Martin's entitled to it. Graham Crook. They're all entitled to a fair and open investigation of their conduct to protect their reputation. By CASA choosing to cover it up, it's not fair to these people. They are equally, I'm getting my view here, so I'm saying these people are entitled to represent their view as well. And that's the fair process. I'd love that to happen.
How should that investigation be conducted?
Well, I think what I'm planning on doing, I'm going to write to the Ombudsman tomorrow, and I would actually like to, and I have put these allegations on people, but I'd like to formalise my allegations to the Commonwealth Ombudsman against those people. So I've got about 25 specific allegations against Dr. Alec and against Craig Martin. I'd actually like to submit those allegations with the evidence to the Commonwealth Ombudsman. So rather than just investigate the wider issue of my matter, he actually investigates their conduct. And that, to me, is the fair thing for them. Because that gives them an open, let's see what the results of that investigation highlight.
Glenn, should the industry provide a mass response petition for the executive team at CASA to resign over this?
That's probably a step a little bit further. And I'd like to wait now and see what the Commonwealth Ombudsman comes up with. But I would like to organise a petition, an industry-wide petition, and calling on the resignation of those individuals. Yes, absolutely.
I mean, I don't understand how their positions can be tenable, given the fact that these positions are paid to know what the regulations are. I mean, I think if we have a situation where the Ombudsman comes back in phase 2 and makes clear that, first of all, there was no regulations to prohibit a franchise AOC. Therefore, all of the actions taken by CASA to molest and harass your business by way of, we'll call it a regulatory shutdown, in terms of a process of an inability of the regulator to make a decision on what your business could or could not do, and by placing it into a state of holdover on a very short leash, ultimately led to the destruction of the business, because you can't trade like that. It's like saying to someone, I'm going to make you a Ford dealer, but I'm only giving you a 7-day license to be a Ford dealer. But by the way, you've invested enough money that you need a full 2 to 3 years of trading to get the business to profitability. And at the end of every 7 days, you come to us, and what we'll do is we'll spend a bit of time arguing with ourselves about whether we're going to let you have an extension. And then meanwhile, your creditors are all screaming because they want money, and your staff are costing you at the earth because you've got to continue to pay them. But we'll be really indecisive. We'll not really give you clear answers. We'll muck you around until finally your business collapses, and then we'll sit there and go, okay, well, we achieved our result without having to shut him down.
Absolutely.
Get the point?
Yeah.
In other words, we can make no decision by forcing regulatory indecision that gets us to the end goal of getting rid of the business.
And they could never make a decision, because any decision they made would have been unlawful. So that's why placing restrictions on the business's ability is much smarter, much cleverer manipulative tactic.
So a lot of this go ahead.
Yeah, to go ahead, fire away, mate. Yep.
So a lot of this I mean, it's just so much of it, Glenn. And in all honesty, I really could sit you down for 3 hours and we wouldn't even scratch the tip of the iceberg. But, you know, you've got 25 years of experience in all of this, Glenn. You know, you're not an idiot. You're a pretty switched on guy. You might be passionate. Hell, I'm passionate. And I'm told by CASA I'm the most hated person in the aviation industry because I speak up and I refuse to be silenced on these issues. But you've got 25 years of experience. What would you change? I mean, you know, obviously this does need change. I mean, my opinion is we really need to clear the decks. It's time for a complete reset of the entire upper element of the organisation, because frankly, if that's the best of their thinking, then it's not good enough and it's never going to be good enough. And if they don't already know that it's not good enough, they're never going to know it's not good enough. So it's time to move them on. And so I almost feel like I should write a letter to CASA saying the actions of CASA towards the industry are not tenable and it's time to move on. I mean, they could do the, you know, they could do the honourable thing and just leave, which would probably be nice, because that way it wouldn't have to be ugly for the industry. Or I guess they could make it really difficult and try and fight, kick and squeal. But it really does appear to me that it is time now for a major cleanup CASA initiative. And that needs to be a full, broad reset of the CASA board. I think that the government's got to get rid of all these quango sitters, the little friends of friends and the mates of mates and the, you know, the little, you know, we owe a favour possibly to this person and that person, so we'll give them an opportunity to sit here and there. Got to get rid of all of that. We need to put a chairman in charge of CASA that has strong grassroots aviation experience, because right now the most busted area of the regulation is its ability to actually function at the grassroots of aviation, and potentially look at replacing the board members with, you know, and this is a crazy idea, why not put the leadership of all the industry associations on the board of CASA for 3 years? Because my argument would be this: we couldn't do much worse than the current crowd. We could not do much worse. You know, the minister obviously sits back and says, oh, you know, we have to be very conservative with all of this because we couldn't be radical. Well, the outcome of what you've currently been doing is already pretty radical. It's the wholesale destruction of aviation. And I would dare say that if the leadership of the industry bodies were involved, we would not be allowing that to happen. Of course, a new DAS, a reformer, someone who has experience with the US system, experience with the Australian system, someone that's able to cut through anyone that says it can't be done, someone who has a can-do attitude, and obviously to support that DAS with a deputy and a legal and the rest of this executive that are capable of understanding that the current approach has not worked. And that really seems to be the thing in my mind, Glenn, is that they just can't accept that what they're doing is not working. And they're like that little boy trying to shove his thumb in the dike. The dike's failing. You've only got 2 thumbs, guys. When you've got 3 holes, you've got a problem, right? And right now they've got about 20 holes and just 2 thumbs. So it really does need, it needs a completely different level of thinking. And I don't think you're going to find the answers. I don't think the industry will ever find the answers with the crowd that's there, because the crowd that's there are the ones that have led us to where we are today. Glenn?
Correct, yeah, absolutely. It needs, I mean, the changes in my mind, and I've touched on this before, but people call for a Royal Commission. I personally, a Royal Commission's too big. Australia's got too much on its plate at the moment. You know, Australia's got as a nation, we've got some of the biggest challenges. We need our energies focused on fixing those problems. It needs the minister to ring up, it needs the minister to direct CASA. 3 criteria. Everything that CASA puts out from today going forward must meet 3 criteria: simple, accountable, effective. If it's not simple, accountable, and effective, it doesn't meet our requirements, whether that be legislative change, the way we engage with people, our expectations of industry. Those 3 key words. If it doesn't meet that criteria, is it simple? Yes, tick. Is it accountable? Does it make somebody accountable? Yes, tick. Is it effective? Does it do its job? Tick, yes, bang, that's what it is. So that's what the minister's statement of expectations should say to CASA. Simple, accountable, effective. It needs a board restructure. It needs the current board to move on, and it needs a new board, as they drawing on the enormous pool of talent that's available in industry now as a result of the pandemic. It's the ideal opportunity to revamp the board, and it needs changes of those key personnel in the executive management, specifically Dr. Jonathan Alec and Craig Martin and Graham Crawford need to leave the organisation. I don't care if the government parachutes them into another organisation, mate. Let some other government department, they don't have to lose their job, just get them out of aviation safety. Put them in something else. Let them looking after kindergartens or schools or parks, or find something else for them where they don't have an impact on safety. So they don't even need to leave their job. They can hang on to their public service gigs. They can get their $500,000 a year. Just get them out of aviation.
About that, Glenn. You know, in the private sector, when you do a horrible job, you get shown the door.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a pretty simple and proven, methodology that if you don't deliver, you're out. And CASA should be no different. You shouldn't be a protected species just because you work for CASA. That shouldn't be the case.
CASA FOI lost his job for hitching a ride in a helicopter. These blokes should be shown the door real damn quick. Real damn quick.
So obviously a complete overhaul of the board, a complete overhaul of the DAS. What about the fact that CASA clearly have a skill shortage in the middle level of the organisation as well? It seems to me that in some cases they are so understaffed and under-resourced where it actually matters. And I dare say we could take some of that $500,000 and we probably could employ a few extra people to work out in the field where they're interacting with industry, good qualified people to support industry, and to give those staff a charter of responsibility to ensure that their interaction and function with industry must support. It must support things, simple things like a basic response service framework. If you put a request into CASA, you don't wait. It guarantees you must get a response within a certain time frame. You must be given a response so that you as a citizen and as a participant of aviation can go about enjoying aviation or being productive in your business. Businesses can't wait around for CASA to take months to solve simple problems and be expected to be nimble and agile and able to take advantage of opportunity so that they can be strong employers, strong contributors to state and federal economy. These things can't be achieved unless CASA is doing its job. And when we speak about over-regulation, in the concept of over-regulation is under-delivery, a failure to deliver service to the industry in a timely fashion that allows the industry to actually do its job as well.
Oh, look, to give you an idea of timeframes, before the change of CMT and the complete change of CASA opinion on my business, the business was operating. Now, one of the members joined our organisation. It was quoted by CASA as a 6-hour task to do the administrative paperwork to get that member on board. It took them 12 months to process, Ben. A 6-hour task. You should see the CASA worked on my job. So if a task allocated by CASA was a 5-hour job, they worked on it at a rate of about 30 minutes a week, I averaged. So, a 5-hour task would take 10 weeks for them to complete. The timelines they're horrific.
Well, Glenn, it's such a staggering story. I understand that we are looking forward to seeing you testify in front of the Senate Rural Regional Affairs Transport Committee, for you to be given the opportunity to be provided full parliamentary privilege, and for you to be able to go into that environment and lay bare the entire story. And I think that what I really hope, and I think what many of us across the industry really hope that we see, is that there's been a lot of inquiries. And I've said it before, you can see when you watch these inquiries the level of contempt that the regulator has for this industry, because they can't answer a question. And I actually think that your ability to answer a question publicly is actually quite important. And you watch these Senate inquiries and you watch the CASA representatives sit in there in those inquiries, and they duck and they weave and they dodge. There's never a straight answer for anything, because the truth of the situation is they are constantly manipulating. And it's actually sad to watch because it's really clear in my mind. And I think, again, it's a feeling that is, at least it's said to me, whether other people want to say it publicly or not, I will say it. It is absolutely clear that CASA are misleading the Deputy Prime Minister. There's no doubt. There's no doubt. Absolutely no doubt. Because I can't believe that any politician representing his constituency, or in the case of the Deputy Prime Minister representing the country, would choose to stand with an organisation that has demonstrated the cultures that CASA has shown. Not that we think that they've shown, what they have done. We need to judge CASA on what they have done, period. Because what they say is actually meaningless because they don't answer questions. They don't give a straight story. They do not respond to industry in a clear and transparent manner. And we know this to be a case because there's been no safety cases presented on the issue of pilot medicals, just a bunch of rubbish excuses, rubbish statements, gobbledygook that absolutely no one would understand, and it's designed to be that way because they're just trying to explain themselves out of having to provide an explanation. There's been no safety case put forward on the whole Angel flight debacle. There's been no safety cases that were put up by CASA to counter the argument for the introduction of independent flight instructors, which we desperately need.
Yes.
Glenn, you set up a business to provide franchise AOC support for aero clubs because aero clubs in this country can't damn well afford to be involved with CASA flight training because CASA have made the system unworkable.
Absolutely.
And when we go and have this conversation with CASA, they sit there shaking their heads going, no, it's really affordable, Ben. It's really, it's so easy. Ben, they're rushing. There's aero clubs all over Australia. They're rushing to sign up to 141, 142. It's that good. This is the hot sauce. The only problem is, CASA, there are fewer people today in the aero club sectors providing flight training under the CASA system than at any point in the history of general aviation in this country.
Oh, they've been decimated.
In the history. Like you said, it's not just decimated, Glenn, completely destroyed. And it's been done through failed thinking, an inability to listen to industry, an unwillingness to accept that they've ever got the damn thing wrong, and an absolutely defiant attitude, which is, screw you, you will not tell us, we are CASA, we know more than you will ever dream to know, and by God, we will not listen to you because you disagree with us and you challenge us. It's shameful. It's the most shameful display of childish, irresponsible behaviour you have ever seen put on anywhere, and it's coming from a so-called safety regulator, Glenn. I mean, I feel for you because I have sat in those meetings and I have listened to Roger Crossway and Stephen Campbell sit across the table and defend their 141, 142 framework. And it was strange. I've said this to other people. When we met with them to discuss the need for independent flight instructors and said, we've got to get this done. We've got to reinvigorate general aviation. We've got to get pilots being trained across the country. Do you not understand that if we can train more pilots, we grow the economy? We will create more jobs. We'll create demand for flight instructors. We'll create demand for maintenance companies. We'll create demand for airports. We'll create demand for hangars. And the defiant attitude of they just did not want to hear that the regulations that they had constructed were not working. And instead of actually sitting down and saying, okay, look, we've got a problem. You're going to have to sit down and try and understand this. It's push it away, and we don't want to know about it. And so when we watched the debacle with your APTA, Glenn, and you and I had previous conversations because I was saying, Glenn, we've got to get the aero. This is the best way we can get aero clubs back in because they just can't afford the overheads. This is one of the best solutions I've seen. And you and I, you would remember, very early days of me saying to you, Glenn, this could really work. This could actually help aero clubs get back into this space. If we can't get independent flight instructors, this is the next best option. And it's just a defiant refusal, And then to go and close this operation down was it was heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking.
Yeah. Well, I've been living it, Ben, trust me. You know, it needs just good intention people, Ben, just good intention people. That's what it needs in CASA. As many of them are. A framework of accountability would be a good place to start. Key performance indicators to properly assess the performance of CASA's staff members and CASA's executive. And more importantly, and I'm positive you would agree with me with this, Glenn, CASA must come to the table and start publishing statistics that matter. Enough of these annual reports with this parade of pumped up, statistics that make the organization look good. I'll tell you some statistics we need to know as an industry. How many airworthy aircraft have a maintenance release in this country? How many aircraft have a maintenance release and are airworthy? Just how many? Don't tell us how many are on the register. Tell us how many aircraft owners are investing the money to keep those airplanes flying, because the number of registered aircraft versus the number of airworthy airplanes are two completely different numbers. One number makes you look good. One number is the reality that we need to understand how we start to fix the problems of the general aviation industry. But they don't want to publish it. They don't want to publish it because it would be a scathing, absolutely scathing indictment of the failure of the regulator. The second number we really need to know about is we want to know how many active AOCs are left actually working in Australia. How many active certificate of approvals for maintenance operators are working in Australia? How many LAMEs are actually working in Australia versus how many have a license? Because it would be a horrifying statistic. It would be a sombering moment of reality that we can start to ask ourselves a question. Do we need a $500,000 deputy DAS? Or do we need to start rethinking what we're doing to get the industry working itself? And Simon Bromley rightfully says there, we also need to know the number of medicals. How many medicals are actually being generated in the industry? How many medicals are being rejected in the industry? Real statistics that we as business people within the industry and participants of the industry can use to understand what the health and condition of our industry is. Because the ones we're being delivered right now, you may as well roll the chocolate wheel and pull whatever number off the thing where the flapper ends, because they're meaningless. They mean absolutely nothing. And that BITRA report that's produced, BITRA could do everyone a favour and deliver that report on a 5-inch wide cardboard roll, and you can hang it in the outhouse. It's about as useful as it is as well. Another stat that I'd be very interested to have a look at, Ben, would be 15 years ago, how many flying schools were foreign owned? And now in 2020, how many flying schools are foreign owned? You'd be blown away. You'd be blown away.
I have to apologise to Ken Watts. Ken Watts is on comments saying, shush, Ben. You're right, Ken. I get very animated with this because I actually give a shit and I care about this industry. And it is so frustrating to watch our community suffer what we're going through, because the reality, this is the truth. The truth is these problems are very, very easy to fix. We can fix these issues. There is nothing that we are facing as an industry that we can't turn around and turn it around in a very short space of time and lead the aviation industry into a phase of unprecedented economic growth. And we can do that. We absolutely can do it because the demand for aviation is there. You would know, Glenn, when the economies of the world are firing, Australia has a brilliant opportunity to be a world leader in flight training. And no, we don't need large multinational offshore companies to come in and fund Australian flight training. What we need is aviation regulations that allow small to medium-sized general aviation businesses to succeed. What happened? What has happened in this country that we've given up? We've somehow just given up on the ideals of the Australian enterprise, Australian opportunity, Australian innovation, jobs for Australians. When did we abandon these ideals? When did we just run up the white flag and say it's all too hard, let someone else come in and do it for us? I don't think the average Australian wants to see this happen to this nation. And I think no one in general aviation wants to see it fail. We want to see it succeed. And hopefully people understand that what we're trying to achieve with these interviews, Glenn, is that whilst this will be confronting for some people in CASA, there is no doubt about it. It'll be confronting. We're going to continue to be confronting because it's actually critical. It has actually a huge opportunity. It's a massive opportunity now for the regulator to take a fresh look at what it's doing and to say, right, clearly we've got it wrong. Clearly there's an atmosphere of disagreement against us. Let's rethink this. Let's try and bring the industry back in and make it work. The question I'll ask you, Glenn, is how long do you think it'll take for us to get to that point where they realise that, or do you think we won't get there at all?
I think that if the minister makes a decision to change the personnel over from within CASA, I think most people in CASA want change. I think most people in CASA are on board with this. I think if the minister acts quickly, okay, and I think within a few months, if there can be some serious personnel changes within CASA, I think the thing's salvageable. I think if the culture of cover-up, misfeasance, malfeasance, etc., continues, it's doomed for failure. It won't change. It needs prompt action now.
And action is probably the greatest place that we can finish this conversation tonight, Glenn. What action can we take to support you? What action can the industry take to support the industry in trying to take these issues forward?
Okay, I guess from my personal perspective, how people could support me, I post regularly on P Prune and Auntie Prue. For those less familiar, Auntie Prue is a more investigative sort of website, if you like, somewhat similar to P Prune. Follow my story on P Prune particularly and have a look at Auntie Prue. But also what I'd encourage, people have already donated to my GoFundMe page. I believe I've got the funds now to take this case all the way forward. What I'd call on is, and one other thing, sorry, all the questions that have popped up on the bottom of the screen here, I will attend to those tomorrow on P Prune. So when somebody's written something on there, I will respond to that on P Prune tomorrow. So please follow that there. What people can do is, what I'd love to see them do, Ben, and this isn't a stitch up, you haven't asked me to do this, but the best thing people could do is join AOPA. If all of a sudden, if 1,000, I don't know how many members you've got, Ben, but if 1,000 people looked at this story and thought, I really want to do something, I don't need your money. Invest, what it is, $90, $100, whatever your AOPA membership, get yourself an AOPA membership. That will give you, Ben, a very clear message. How many members have you got at the moment, roughly, Ben? Sorry to put you on the spot, you know?
No, you're not putting me on the spot. You know, we fought really, really hard over the last 4.5 years that I've been involved with AOPA to get that membership number up. And at the peak, we got it up to about 3,700. The problem is that COVID-19 has actually been a real kick in the pants. And I reckon we'll probably close out this year by keeping about 2,100 to 2,200 members in the association. And to be honest, it's devastating because you're right. And I have to say, this is not a stitch up. And I do appreciate the sentiment, Glenn, and I really do, because I don't think a lot of people realize that if we don't have the inflow of membership come into the organization, we can't mount the fight. And, you know, I've said to people, I get an amazing amount of feedback from people. There's some people who love me. There's some people who hate me. There's some people who can give or take or whatever. I always say the same thing, and that is, I'm not the perfect advocate by a long shot. And there's probably people in this industry that are far smarter than I am and probably far better at it than I'll ever be. But I do genuinely care about aviation, and I really do care about general aviation. And I really want to see general aviation succeed. And I feel passionately that we must stand up for ourselves, and we must not allow either the government or the regulator degrade us to a point where we feel that we are powerless. We are not powerless. We are actually incredibly strong, and the democratic system allows us to be strong. And a great example of that was actually earlier, and I meant what I said to Jack Vevers, that, you know, the Aero Club down at Tyab ended up getting 25,000 signatures of support because they were able to share their experience, and people were able to hear and understand the abuse that the Aero Club was facing at the hands of a council that was acting quite poorly. We are doing that right now, Glenn. And you know that that video that we did with you ended up being shared amongst 80,000 people, and it had 20-odd thousand people watch it in length. And so this effort to communicate in this medium is about broadening our ability to communicate, not just with the aviation industry, but with communities, to say that the abuses our industry are suffering really can't continue. And we're like everyone else in every other sector and parts of the community, and that all we ask for is to be dealt with some respect and dignity, and be allowed to go on and run our businesses free of being constantly, run into the ground by bureaucrats that seem to enjoy it. So it is a vital role that AOPA plays. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes what we do is perfect, and sometimes it's the best response. Other times, Glenn, some people will say, I don't agree with it, but we need to support it, whether it's me today or someone else tomorrow. This industry needs a strong and powerful representation to ensure that we never go quietly in having our rights abused.
I think AOPA has very much set itself up, I think, as as representing GA industry. I really do believe that, Ben. I think there's a number of organisations around, but I think AOPA's taken the leadership. I think what I'd call on people is 1,000 new people join AOPA over the next week. Imagine what that funding would do for you, Ben. I don't know what your membership is. If it's $100 a year, if 1,000 people who care about GA went and got an AOPA membership over the next week, not even for themselves, buy it for a gift for somebody who's interested in flying. I get the magazine, the website, all the bits that go with it. Stimulate that interest. Get 1,000 new memberships at $100 each. That's $100,000 of new funding for AOPA. It gives you administrative support, secretarial support, people to make submissions. I mean, I'm not expecting you to go and buy a jet ski and ride off into the sunset on a jet ski. I know every single one of those memberships will actually go towards the organisation being better resourced so it can represent every single one of us. So please.
Glenn, a misconception, mate. A misconception is that, and it's part of the success of what we've been able to do in the last 4.5 years, is we've redefined the brand of AOPA. We were 4.5 years ago, we produced a magazine.
Yeah.
And our value proposition to the members were, well, we produced a magazine. And you could pick up your magazine once every couple of months and you could read about a test flight review or some fluffy article. Well, the problem is that was not protecting our rights. That was not fighting to introduce new regulations that would support a far more progressive aviation industry and enable us to succeed. And so when I came in, I said to the board at the time, we are going to challenge a lot of thinking about what AOPA is about, and there will be some people who will not necessarily initially agree. But what we have to do is we have to transform the organisation to being a very powerful spokesperson, but rolling up its sleeves and getting involved with individual members to help these issues through if we are ever to expect to see instrumental change. Not incremental change, instrumental change, an entire rethinking of what aviation is about and where we're going to head to. And so it's not easy. I'm one guy. You know this, Glenn. I'm one guy. I don't have a PA. I don't have a secretary. And I know a lot of people get frustrated because they try and get a hold of me and it's like my phone will run crazy. But I'm one guy. And I hope what I'm showing the aviation industry is one person can make an enormous difference. Two people could make an even bigger difference. And I would love nothing more, Glenn, nothing more than to see those 1,000 memberships roll through the front door of AOPA, because, mate, I would love to have you working as an advocate in this industry. Clearly passionate, caring about the industry, caring about its participants, caring about things being done properly and that power being meted out to the industry in a responsible and accountable way. You are exactly the kind of person that this industry needs to have representing it. And, the truth is I can't be everywhere. I can't, be right across all of the issues from one side of Australia to the next. Imagine what we could do, Glenn. Imagine what we could do if we had the membership support and we had a Ben Morgan in every state of Australia who Monday to Friday was focused on the issues in that state and were able to pursue and chase down those key and important items. We would make huge progress, but we need to, in order to get there, we need the membership support. And so, I quite often say this when I'm talking to my board. I don't know, what does the Australian aviation industry need to see in order to go, yeah, okay, I'm going to get behind this. And I, selfishly, I look at it and I think to myself, why would you not want to get behind this? Why would you not want to back an organisation and a passionate advocate saying we want to make this industry work and succeed. And so I would like to think, Glenn, that the things that I've done over the last 4.5 years have sent a message to the aviation industry, which is I'm genuine about it, and I would welcome the support. I really would, because I can't drive it forever on my own. And it probably will come a time into the future where I too will, like most other people, have to make a decision on where I go and what I do with my life. I'm 41 years of age, and I work not for a very large sum of money, and I have a young, fiance to be very soon, by the end of this month, I'm told. And I have to look at having a family and all of those things. We need an organisation capable of moving forward and advocating with strength. And so I will join you tonight, and I will say the aviation industry has the power to make all the difference here. Every single participant of this industry has the ability to make a conscious choice, and the choice is simple. I'm going to choose to back an organisation that's backing me, and maybe we get it done. And if we do get it done, that was a great investment. That was really a great investment. So that's the sales pitch. You're not going to get a magazine. You're not going to get a fuel discount card. You're not going to get all of this ancillary stuff so that you can feel like, your $129 bought you everything in the world. What you're going to get is you're going to get powerful, passionate, determined, committed advocates that will never give up. Our core belief is never give up. We never walk away from the fight. Even if we lose, we dust ourselves off, we get back up, and we get straight back in that ring, and we go another round until we can get progress in the direction. So, Glenn, thank you.
No problems.
Thank you for sharing your story. I know that there's even potentially more that's going to come about after the next round with the Ombudsman, and I want to stay glued to this, not because I want to flog the dead horse, because I know there's a lot of people who've probably listened to the story so far, but I want to stay glued to this because, as I have said, this is the test case. This is the moment in time when we get to see publicly how CASA will behave. And we're going to show that process, and I want to be able to report to the industry and make sure that this goes on the record with the Senate Rural Regional Affairs Transport Committee, so that they too get to see that CASA did have the opportunity to do the right thing, and to see whether they choose to do that, or whether they choose to go down the path of fighting you and making the process as painful and miserable as possible.
All right, Ben, thank you very much. And I just want to do a quick thank you. Somebody from P. Prune with a good sense of humour sent me a bottle of 12 bottles of wine last time. I don't know if you can see it there, but it's actually Casa Santos. So I'm going to go enjoy my...
You're going to enjoy a glass of Casa. Just double check the damn bottle, Glenn. Have someone come and take the first sip for you.
It might have come from Carmody. He might have topped the top off and put something inside it. No, he wouldn't do that.
I meant what I said. I meant what I said. If the industry start to really throw their weight of support behind us, Glenn, I would love to find a way to have you come and work with us. You're a bloody champion, mate, and you're a huge value to the aviation industry, and I've got a sense that you've still got your finest hours well and truly in front of you, mate. So you just keep at it.
This little puppy dog's going to go down swinging, mate. Don't you worry. Hey, thanks everybody who always supports me. The comments on P. Prune, the messages, the people from in CASA that contact me, the people who used to work at CASA that contact me, AOPA's support, all my friends around me, everybody. Thank you.
All right. Righto, Glenn. Till next time.